Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar hosted by the Organization Development and Change Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State. This is a monthly webinar series presented during our lunch hour. My name is Aza Al-Hajri. I'm a PhD student in the Workforce Education and Development Program at the Pennsylvania State University. I will be moderating today's webinar along with my colleague Jose Sandoval, who is a PhD candidate in Learning, Design, and Technology program at Penn State University, and Marsha Rummel, a PhD student in Workforce Education and Development. In terms of the interactive format for this webinar, please use the chat feature in the Zoom platform. If you have any questions about the presentation, please use chat feature on Zoom. You can see the chat button at the bottom of the screen. The Q&A session will be at the end of the presentation. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change are designed for professionals who need the skills and knowledge to effectively lead change in their organization. Furthermore, there is a master and a PhD program in workforce education and development with a concentration in human resource development and organization development. Our programs are created a continuous monthly free webinar series with experts around the world. Today, we are presenting Using Your Everyday OD Skills to Save the Planet, presented by Dr. Matt Minahan. Dr. Matt Minahan holds a Doctor of Education, has several decades of experience in strategic planning, organization design and development, and leadership development. His consulting practice focuses on organizations and leaders undertaking enterprise-wide change programs. He works in the private, public, and non-for-profit sectors with senior executive teams who want to increase the capacity of their organization to develop new business strategies and redesign their organization to meet new business challenges. He earned his doctorate from the George Washington University Executive Leadership Program in Organization Development, following an MS and Master degree in Organization Behavior from the University of Hartford and a BA in Communication from the University of Maryland. He holds adjunct faculty appointments in the School of Public Policy at the American University and the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. He's also a guest lecturer in several doctoral programs and is also a frequent presenter at national and regional conferences. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker for today, Dr. Minahan. The floor is yours.
Great. Thanks very much, Aza and Jose and Marcia, for inviting me and organizing this. Pleasure for me to be here. We have an interesting case study today. We're always in search of ways to apply our skills. Some of us like to do that in a work setting. That's great. Some of us apply our OD skills in private settings. And I'm going to tell you the story about applying OD skills in a way that everybody on this call can do today in an advocacy setting, depending upon which topics you choose to advocate for. Where I live, the topics have to do with the Chesapeake Bay. We live on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay in a county that has 538 miles of shoreline here. And so we care a lot about how the bay survives, how it's treated, and particularly how the land around the Chesapeake Bay is treated and developed. And so that's what we'll be talking about today. So our title is How Our OD Skills Help Save the Chesapeake Bay. I want to start with something about, just so you know where I'm coming from. I take as my mission in the world to reduce the gap between the human condition and human potential in order to build healthy communities and a better world for all. So that's been my life's mission for all the years that I've been working, and particularly the 40 plus years I've been working in OD today. So our session today is First of all, I want to hear from you about your examples of best advocacy campaigns, things that you know about or have worked on. What made them work for you? Then I'll spend a few minutes on why the Chesapeake Bay matters, how we used our OD skills to mobilize energy, and where we succeeded, and some of the stories about how we didn't, and lessons learned for the next time. But let me pause the slides here and uh, just invite anyone here to write into the chat or to speak up and speak about advocacy efforts that you know have been successful or that you've worked on, and what made them work for you. So we'll take just a couple of minutes here and get you some time to get that into the chat. And while you do that, let me get started with a couple of the other content points that I want to make, and then we'll circle back to what you've incorporated in the chat. And I want to hear some more from you about that. So I just want to begin by acknowledging that we are in the lands stolen from the Algonquian native peoples of the world. You can see this whole area here is the Chesapeake Bay, and this land was well cared for and well stewarded by the Algonquian Indians. When settlers from the United Kingdom arrived here, or England at the time arrived here in 1635, the waters were pristine, the lands were fully forested, there was no sign of pollution, the ecosystem was strong and powerful, and I'd love to say that's the case now, and it just is not. One thing about our area here is it's not just the water, it's the watershed. Because look how large the watershed here is. These streams in upstate New York and all through central Pennsylvania, where you guys are, and all through western Maryland and Virginia, all drain into the Chesapeake Bay. So even though I live here, we are deeply concerned about the watershed, because what happens in the watershed is actually what governs what's happening in the Chesapeake Bay. Rich with native species. We have the yellow-crowned night heron, bald eagle is here, osprey, an endangered species, but on the rebound. White-tailed deer, our great blue heron here we see all the time. Dragonflies, blue crabs. You probably know the Chesapeake Bay for our blue crab population. We also are prime habitat for snapping turtles. And so we have a big investment in keeping the habitat healthy to support all of these various species. I mentioned the blue crab. That's a very important part of the species chain here, but it's also an important element to our economy. Oysters are both important to the economy and also to the environment. One oyster can filter 50 gallons of water in 2 hours. Let me say that again. One of these little beautiful babies can filter 50 gallons of water in just 2 hours. So we have a huge investment in having these oysters thrive and survive. And we have several programs where I live here that are replenishing the oyster supply. Where I live is here in Anne Arundel County. This is a map of the county. As you can see, it's mostly on the Chesapeake Bay. We live on the South River, which is just off the Chesapeake Bay. And in context, we are the western shore of Maryland. The eastern shore of Maryland is where some of you may have come to go to our beaches: Ocean City, Bethany Beach, Rehoboth, Lewis. These are all the Maryland beaches on the ocean. These are the eastern shore ports and some beach areas. This is the western shore, where you can see all of this coastland, which we care about. What connects the two, east Eastern Shore and Western Shore is both a bridge and a barrier. The Chesapeake Bay bridge allows us to access both sides of the bridge. Until 1953, there was no bridge here, and the only way across was by a ferry. But it's also a barrier because there's a toll there. And not only is it a physical barrier, but there's also a psychological barrier. Life on the Eastern Shore is quite different. The philosophy of life on the Eastern Shore is more rural, more agricultural. Uh, Life on the Western Shore is very urban, dominated by the economies of Baltimore and Washington. Where people want to live is right here at the mouth of our river is the Thomas Point Lighthouse. It has served this area for 130 years, and this is where people want to live. This is the far edge of civilization for people on the Western Shore, and this marks the boundary between the eastern and the western shores of the Chesapeake Bay. The problem is where we want to live is also the most vulnerable area to climate change, the critical area. Critical area protects the 1,000 feet closest to the water. And so all these yellow demarcations here note the critical area, which is the most heavily protected. It's much more difficult to build in the critical area. You're required to have special stormwater protections in the critical area, and agriculture and native species are particularly encouraged in the critical area. So as it happens, where we want to live also happens to be the most vulnerable part of our county. And the most vulnerable of the most vulnerable are the 5 peninsulas. These are the areas where there is one road in and one road out, where it's fairly narrow between both sides of the peninsula. You'll see this peninsula, uh, uh, this peninsula here has rivers on 2 sides and the bay on this side. This is the Broad Neck Peninsula. This is the Annapolis Neck Peninsula. Again, 2 different rivers and the bay. This is the South River Peninsula, the Selby Peninsula. Rivers, 2 different rivers, and down here is Shady Side with rivers on multiple sides. So these are the land masses that are the most vulnerable because they're lowest, they're closest to the water, and they also have one road in, one road out, which makes it very vulnerable to climate change and rising tides. So as I point out here, these are demarcated by water on 3 sides. They're the lowest lying. We see frequent flooding this past week with these easterly winds. We've had some minor aerial flooding every day. Saltwater intrusion is another problem here. That is that the salt water is entering underneath the land, and many of these communities do not have public water, so they're serviced by wells, and that presents another problem here. The land is sinking, the seas are rising, and these are the most desirable places to live anywhere in our area. So our challenge here is to find the right balance between protecting the environment, meeting citizen needs, and quality of life. If we only were protecting the environment, nobody would live here. And that would make some of our naturalists very, very happy, but it would be a disaster for the community. It'd be a disaster for people who already live here. If we just met citizen needs, there'd be building all over the place. This green area that you're seeing in the picture would be gone, and there'd be townhomes and McMansions there. And if we did that, we'd be compromising on the environment and the quality of life. So we are always struggling here to find the balance, to find the trade-off between protecting the environment, meeting citizen needs, and the quality of life. So here's a bit of the story. 2017, we had recent storms that caused minor flooding. We remembered Hurricane Isabel, which came through here in 2003. Always big fears of the big one. where I live on the Mayo Peninsula, 2017, we'd had a construction moratorium which was ending, and citizens were concerned about the development process and development pressures. We were losing our forests. Forests are the most important element of preserving the Chesapeake Bay because, first of all, they exchange carbon dioxide for oxygen. So they absorb carbon dioxide and they return oxygen to the air. Okay, that's a big deal. You hear people talk about how the Amazon is the biggest carbon dioxide sink on the planet. That's because of all the vegetation there. So our trees are really important for that, but they also anchor the ground and they minimize stormwater runoff. So most of the challenges we have in the bay are from agricultural runoff, pigs, chicken, cow manure, and stormwater runoff, sediment coming down hills. Our trees are really important in preventing that kind of runoff here. So we knew there was a general development plan, and this is where the county every 10 years looks at itself overall and examines its zoning maps and makes some decisions about where it wants to focus development. So our challenge was how we could slow development and preserve the forests and influence the general development plan. So our decision was to build a coalition, build strength via numbers, build a coalition, and make some noise. So first thing we did was we rounded up our contacts in environmental organizations and we asked them for names. We scoured community web pages for contacts information. We compiled a database of potential allies and made phone calls to 25 of them and then invited all. We had a traditional meeting. It was badly planned, but we invited them all to come and had this meeting. But there were too many voices and agendas and no clear outcomes. You know, our thought was that if we just got the right people in the room, they would all get it and agree. But there were too many different perspectives, a large variety of people advocating for their own preferred solutions, and we didn't really come to any consensus at all, and there was no clear outcome. So the other mistake we made was we thought we would do power sharing. We thought that, we had this network of 25 advocates, and there was a prominent advocate who was respected in the community. And so she asked if she could take over the next phase of the project, and we said yes. That was a problem. She didn't step in. The process stalled, and so we were kind of stuck in 2018. In 2019, we took it back. So the first thing we did was we created a web page and a Gmail account and Facebook accounts. And then we had a second meeting, and this one we did a better job. We designed the meeting, we had a smaller group, we sat in a circle, we had charts, and we had maps. So the big lesson we learned was just because they're advocates doesn't mean they're going to come to consensus. And just because you've got the people in the room doesn't mean the meeting's going to work out. And 25 was too many. So we had a smaller group. We designed it better. And we, as sitting in a circle, we created a better and a different kind of dynamic. And we used charts and maps to make our point here. So we focused on the county as a whole, not on one river. We have 5 rivers which run through the county. This is the Chesapeake Bay. Here's the eastern shore. We are right here on the Chesapeake Bay. And so you can see these are all rivers that drain into the Chesapeake Bay. This is the Potomac River here. This is the Patuxent River. And then our rivers, this river is the Patapsco, which goes up to Baltimore. So first thing we did is we just wanted to say, okay, so when everything's perfect here, what's the most positive vision of the future that we could come up with for all of our peninsulas? And so we brainstormed factors needed to protect our peninsulas, and we named ourselves the Anne Arundel County Peninsula Coalition, the Anne Arundel County Peninsula Coalition. just made up the name and we figured we were it. So then we asked this smaller group of people for names of potential allies and supporters because they were in fact the people who we could then count on to get the other right people in the room. So we shared the notes every morning, every meeting we had, we got the notes out the next morning and we sought feedback on the notes. So the immediacy that we created with notes the next morning became really important in maintaining the energy. When I've seen other community engagement projects fail, it's because people go to a meeting and then nothing happens. And then 2 weeks later, somebody publishes something, but nobody remembers what it actually was. This is another point that I'll just pass along from my own consulting work, and that is I always stay up till midnight or 3 in the morning if I need to get the meeting notes out to the participants the day after the meeting, because we need to build on that meeting the next morning. And if we don't have consensus around what we did and decided the previous day, then we start to diverge and we start to lose the bounded consensus that we had built the previous day. Same principle applies here when we were dealing with citizen environmental advocates, that we made it a point to get the notes out the next morning. And then we asked them, do these notes reflect the meeting you were at? And we found that was a really valuable way to get people engaged, because when we asked them, we could have just sent the notes around and said, here are the notes from our meeting. But when we asked them to give us feedback on them, they read them and they took them seriously. And we did get some important feedback. So that was all to the good. After some time, we published a first draft of the Peninsula Principles. We had several introductory meetings on Zoom as new people joined the coalition. They needed to be brought up to date, so we told them the story. We shared our maps, we shared our vision, we shared our actions, and sought their feedback on the Peninsula Principles paper. And then we thought we were ready. So we had 3 face-to-face meetings, mostly to build relationships so these advocates could meet each other and develop relationships, but also to develop plans to go forward that they were interested in and involved in. So the Peninsula Principles look like this. It tells a little bit of the story. We talked about the purpose of the Peninsula Principles: to establish a zoning overlay for peninsulas, including rules, criteria, zoning, building codes, tailored to the unique environmental and infrastructure limitations on peninsula. This was another big one for us: to conduct detailed citizen-driven land use planning. It was really important that we not turn this over to the technocrats, really important that we not turn this over to the status quo bureaucrats who really didn't have a stake in making any changes. So we really heavily emphasized citizen-driven. And then also to define and enforce interim criteria for development on peninsulas. We had a huge batch of organizations. I think we had 300 organizations, some of which are here. We ended up having something like 25,000 of the county's 500,000 citizens who were involved in this. And so the Peninsula Principles became our gathering document, it became our rallying cry, and it became the venue that we used in order to approach the government, in order to approach the county council, and to further build our coalition. So in 2020, we went from association to association. We figured what we wanted were associations of associations. So having a neighborhood association here and a neighborhood association there, this county has thousands of those, and that would give us no leverage. But we wanted associations that comprised larger associations. And so, for instance, on the Broadneck Peninsula, there's an association of probably 40 homeowners and community associations. And by getting the Broadneck Peninsula Community Association, we also got the 40 subsidiary associations. Here on the Mayo Peninsula, we have probably, I don't know, 20 citizens associations and community associations. And rather than going to all of them, we got the neighbors of the Mayo Peninsula, which is represents the whole community, and incorporated their 20 associations. So we figured that working wholesale rather than retail would get us more action. We also greatly amped up our social media content. We built on social network theory. I'm sure somewhere in your graduate studies, you've heard something about that. Um, we met with the leadership of the Department of Planning and Zoning. They're the people who actually write the zoning code, and we made our case with them quite forcefully. They then sent us to the director of the budget for the county, and he's a good old environmentalist, and he heard our plea, and we made our case, and he signed on. We presented to the Citizens Advisory Committee. So the process here for developing this general development plan was the county appointed 25 citizens from across the county, a pretty diverse representative group from different neighborhoods and sectors and disciplines and stages of life, and they did the initial establishment of the principles for the general development plan. And so the presentation we made to the Citizens Advisory Committee is here. I think it's still up if anybody is interested in seeing it. And then we decided we need to go to county council and be seen every 2 weeks when they meet. So we had a roster of volunteers to go to the county council. This was our primary influence strategy because we knew that anything we had to do needed to get out of the Citizens Advisory Committee, which it did, but also needed to persuade the council, which ultimately is the decides land use matters here, and had to sign off on all elements of the general development plan. And so this was our first real foray into the political machine here in the county. And then we provided template letters and phone scripts for all of our coalition members to contact their council reps. So today, you can pretty much do that online, with these call to action programs. We didn't have access to those, so we did it all by hand. We called all of our people, we sent them these templates, we encouraged them to send them out as well. And we created a lot of momentum amongst the community and citizen and environmental activists so that, and then we mobilized the letters to the editor campaign. I also drafted a couple of op-eds that got published in the newspaper. So by 2021, we had our first big success. The first draft of the general development paper proposed a peninsula policy development zone, which defined the 5 principles as one road in, one road out, low-lying areas, subject to subsidence and increased high tides. So this is the actual language we got in there. Peninsula policy areas, existing stable communities, primarily residential, surrounded by water and land within the critical area, served by a single primary road, located within and out of the priority funding areas, with and without public sewer. Most of these peninsulas have no public sewer, and most of us are on wells. This was the key, though. Development is primarily limited to infill and redevelopment that must be compatible with the existing character of the neighborhood, and where consideration of saltwater intrusion and sea level rise are given. And that's a big deal because this meant no big new housing developments, no big commercial developments. So we persuaded the technocrats, we persuaded the Citizens Advisory Committee, and it showed up in the first draft of the paper. Success number 2 was we got the development goals created for the peninsula policy areas for the 5 peninsulas. So goal B4 was to prioritize protection of sensitive environmental features on county peninsulas. Goal B42, ensure the maritime industry remains an economic growth of stability and improve the adequacy of critical transportation corridors in peninsula policy areas. So getting these embedded into the general development plan was another big success. And having friends on the Citizens Advisory Committee and making friends with the Citizens Advisory Committee was the second big right thing we did. Success number 3 is we then had a lot of open Zoom meetings for each peninsula to enlist support. So we found the leaders on each of the peninsulas. We had them go to their neighborhood associations. We sponsored the Zoom to explain what we were doing. And this was how we began to mobilize public support for just beyond our coalition for the program. What didn't work is we really had a huge desire to limit traffic on the peninsulas. We retained a couple of environmental lawyers to draft the language for it, but we weren't successful. The council rejected it. The county executive rejected it. So that was another area where we didn't succeed. But we kept up our PR, social media, and council pressure campaigns. The general development plan was approved by the council. Implementation is now underway. We offered to help with the design and facilitation of the next phase of this, but county government was not interested in having a bunch of green weenies engaged at that level in their business. So I think they were afraid where we might take it. So in the last couple of years, to implement this, the county divided itself into 9 regions, and 6 regions have completed their small area plans. So the general development plan was kind of the principles. You saw the goals that we got included in there. But then the county had a long history of small local planning areas. And so they committed to forming these 9 regions and having small groups of people look at the land use and make recommendations back to the county. So I have just completed my service on the Region 9 planning area here. And we've submitted our recommendations for where to add more housing, where to strengthen marinas, where to improve stormwater, where we might create more open space, where we might preserve forests. We've just submitted that to the county, and the county is now considering it. So, and that's been true in 6 of these regions. The last 3 have just gotten underway. So, what do we learn? Well, we decided we started too late with the electeds. County executive, with the county council, we were just behind the 8 ball on that. We got it done, but it was some work, and had we started earlier, it would have been less work. We lost most of a year by that one power sharing decision we made, responding affirmatively to a member who said she wanted to take the lead in the next phase, but who didn't and who dropped the ball. Had we not made that mistake, first of all, it was the right decision to make in the moment, but had we not made that mistake, we would have had more time to work with the electeds. Social media has severe limitations. There are some things we just couldn't do by social media, Zoom. We had to have some face-to-face meetings. They were powerful. They were the most impactful. When we needed breadth of being seen, social media was good, but when we needed depth of commitment, social media was not. So one of the things we learned is when we needed broad exposure, we could do social media, but we couldn't really expect people to do anything coming out of those because the commitment level was very thin. It was broad and thin. When we needed to take action, we did best by having face-to-face meetings. We met in restaurants, typically at 6 or 6:30. We all ordered off the menu. We'd have 15, 20, 25 of us, depending upon the topic. But we realized late that social media was going to have too many limitations for us here. However, combining Facebook and the web page and blogs and e-blasts and newsletters did work for us once we supplemented it with face-to-face meetings, until we couldn't. And that's when COVID happened. So we had to shift our modality then. We also learned that someone needs some technical expertise on the topic and language on the subject. We didn't have enough of that. We cobbled together some people who thought they knew something. But if you're going to take on use your OD skills to take on political advocacy on a topic, the technical topic, you're going to need someone who knows the language, knows the science of it better than we did. And then finally, really good talent can make really good things happen. We had a fabulous writer. We had a fabulous editor. Our web page was gorgeous. It wasn't particularly functional, but it was gorgeous. And really good people made all the difference here. And finally, politics are always at play. I know a lot of OD people come to our field trying to avoid politics, come to our field because they don't want to be dirtied by politics. I hear that from a lot of my master's students. Just let me facilitate, and I don't have to deal with the politics. But the truth is that there were multiple levels of politics here. There was the political level of politics with the county council. There was the politics in our relationship with the Office of Planning and Zoning. They were the technocrats who did the work here. And we didn't begin with a strong relationship with them, but we have built it and still maintain it. And I'm still working very closely with them on a couple of other matters here. But the politics mattered, and we didn't make progress until we realized that and started to take it seriously. We had politics amongst the advocates. There were people who wanted more say, people who wanted less say, people jostling for position, people who wanted to have their theme be prominent. And so that was a whole level of politics. And then we had our own internal politics in our group here, which was about 6 or 8 people who know each other, love each other, but it's still political. So I'm going to stop sharing here. That's my last slide. And let me turn to the chat. Maybe Aza, you have something you want to say?
Yeah, thank you for the insightful presentation, Dr. Minahan. We have some questions from the audience. Let me begin with the first one.
Mhm.
So, in your opinion, what is the most critical lesson learned so far?
Yes, it was nothing happens in the environmental sector without people who are willing to get dirty on politics. You can't just save the trees. You can't just save the fish. You can't just replenish the oysters. Every act we take in this watershed is a political act because there are forces on the other side who want to cut down the trees, who want to overharvest the crabs and overharvest the oysters. So every action we take is a political action. And we as OD people don't like to admit that. We don't like to live in that space. And yet, if we're not willing to do it, we have no chance of influencing government, influencing society at that level.
Okay, and the second question here is, you talked about OD skills. How can we improve our OD skills to be able to face these challenges?
Improve our skills. Well, first thing is to do things. Okay, the best way to improve our skills is to practice and do things. And so if you're not volunteering your facilitation skills in a nursing home or in a nonprofit or in an environmental group, get out there and run a couple of strat planning sessions for them. Do a SWOT for them. We get better at doing these things only by practice. And we were able to do this project because we had people with 20 years of writing experience because they'd practiced, and people with 15 years of web experience because they practiced. And my own community and organizational skills, I've been at it for 30 years, 35 years at the time. And so the best way to improve your skills is to practice. And the best way to practice is to go volunteer somewhere and take on a project that is benefits the community and also provides you a learning opportunity.
Well, thank you all for your fantastic questions. And thank you so much, Dr. Minahan. On behalf of our OD and Change Workforce Aid Program, we hope that you have enjoyed this session today. If we did not get to your question, please send us an email or reach out to the presenter directly via email. For the future webinar, we would like to hear your feedback on today's webinar. Please take the survey using the link in the chat box. And our next webinar is about professional joy. Don't let your dream die with you on October 25th from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern timing. Registration for all events are free and can be found on our websites. You can also find us on our social media platforms such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you. And
Pardon me, Azza, just before you go, I want to acknowledge a couple of colleagues who've written into the chat. Dave Jameson, who I think a longtime friend and colleague, and is on the faculty with me has been on the faculty in a couple of places, and also Tom Finn, who lives here in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Tom asked a question. If you don't mind, Azza, do you mind if I answer Tom's question?
absolutely.
Tom asked in the chat, what's the difference between consulting to an organization and consulting to a community? For me, the big difference is there's no formal structure in a community. In an organization, you've got someone whose job is leader, owner, boss, head, something. And with that comes some formal authority, some position power. And when you're working in a community, you don't have that kind of authorization. The authorizing environment, you've got to create the authorizing environment. And so even if you're working with one of our community association or a homeowners association, there's a president, yes, but typically those presidents are weak and don't have the kind of power that we find in formal organizations. And so I think it's really important to pay attention to the authorizing structure, the authorizing environment, and create it when you are working in the community association or community organizing or environmental space.
I can see another question here, Dr. Minahan, in the Q&A session. Thank you for the presentation. Unfortunately, I joined late. If not already covered, could you share a bit more about how you designed or selected and applied OD frameworks and linked in with the guiding frameworks strategy for land use planning? And if you link to any other international frameworks, for example, SDGs or the CINDI framework for disaster risk reduction. Thanks.
So the disaster risk reduction frameworks were at a technical level, and we weren't working at the technical level. That's really done by the administrative departments of the county government here and the state. We were really working at the political level to try to gain designation for protection of our 5 peninsulas. So in that regard, those types of frameworks were not part of what we were doing here. The OD frameworks we were using had to do with large group meetings, had to do with, I think we had a session that was very similar to Angela Sarian's, her methodology. So we used open space a couple of times. So the modalities we worked in had to do with meeting management and large group meetings. The other model we used is one of my favorites, and that is we were quite intentional about Aza, if you could let me have full screen here for a moment. I just want to use my hands to illustrate how a model here. So we were quite, thank you, we were quite intentional about the different stages of the work we were in. And in particular, thinking about the difference between the divergent stages and the convergent stages. Okay, I'd like to think of this model as kind of a diamond. So you start with an idea or a question, and you brainstorm and you add ideas and you add possibilities and you increase the range of what's absolutely possible until you reach the point where it's time to start eliminating some and to pivot. And so you then enter a period of convergence where we eliminate and eliminate and eliminate and eliminate and arrive at a solution. And so we had several iterations of that diamond in this process. Should we write a peninsula? Should we write a paper? Well, should we? What kind of paper would it be? Then we made the transition to convergence and decided. And in this phase here, from the pivot from divergence to convergence, you have to have criteria. You have to know what your decision criteria are. And I find that's really hard for groups to do. But we use that concept a lot because for every phase of this, it started with an idea. We had to brainstorm and offer ideas and diverge. And then you reach the turning point. And you know when that is, and then you start to converge. And then we start to eliminate ideas that we can't afford, that we can't do, that are too big, that won't work. Criteria emerge, and it's against those criteria we evaluate the last few so that we get to a decision. And that was a really powerful model for our work, plus all the large scale stuff as well. I hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Minahan. And thank you for everyone who joined us today. We hope to see you all soon. Have a good day and a good night to our guests from other time zones. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.